Laila Monroe stood in the staff corridor, with her badge already removed, her apron pocket turned inside
Empty your
out,
apron pocket.
and her 3-year-old son hiding behind a silver serving cart. On the service desk, a diamond cufflink glittered beneath the cold lights. But the truth in that room was darker than theft.
This was found in the linen cart assigned to you.
Celeste Drayton had already decided the story. The black maid had stolen from the billionaire, brought her child where he did not belong, and embarrassed the house that paid her.
You will leave through the rear gate.
Then something small fell from Lila's apron, a blue emergency card. No one noticed the toddler pick it up. No one noticed him slip behind the pantry door.
Mama?
And no one imagined that a child who could barely reach the old wall phone was about to call the one man they thought was too powerful, too distant, and too busy to listen.
Hello?
Mr. Mama crying.
What? Who is this?
But before that call destroyed every lie in the mansion, we need to go back to the morning. Laila first walked into a house that mistook silence for obedience. By the time Laila Monroe realized the room had already judged her, her 3-year-old son was hiding behind a silver serving cart, holding his yellow lunchbox against his chest. Staff entrance of the Whitaker mansion was never meant to feel warm. It smelled of lemon polish, steam, and expensive silence. Shoes clicked across gray stone. Uniforms moved quickly. No one usually stopped unless something had gone wrong. That morning, everyone stopped. Celestis Drayton stood by the service desk with a leather folder under one arm and a small velvet pouch in her hand. "Empty your apron pocket," she said. Laila kept her voice low. "I told you already. I didn't take anything." Graham Lyle, the head of security, stepped closer. His black tie sat tight against his thick neck. "Then prove it." Behind the cart, Micah shifted his little feet. One shoe squeaked against the floor. Laila heard it and felt her heart twist. "Stay right there, baby," she said without turning. "Yes, Mama," Micah whispered. On the desk lay a diamond cufflink belonging to Elias Whitaker, the billionaire who owned the mansion, the gardens, the private cars, and almost every rule inside those walls. He was away at a board retreat. He had not been home for 3 days, and in his absence, one missing cufflink had become more important than the woman who cleaned his floors and folded his mother's blankets. Celeste lifted the pouch slightly. "This was found in a linen cart assigned to you." "I never touched that cart," Laila said. "I was assigned to the West rooms." Celeste's mouth tightened into something that's like a smile. "Laila, please don't make this uglier by lying in front of your child." A few staff members looked toward Micah. Laila felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she did not cry. Not there. Not for them. She glanced toward Denise Caldwell near the pantry door. Denise looked down. That small movement told Laila enough. Denise knew something. Maybe she had seen who planted the cufflink. Maybe she had heard Celeste whispering before breakfast. Maybe she was just afraid of losing her job. Laila understood fear, but understanding it did not make it hurt less. "I want Mr. Whitaker contacted," Laila said. Celeste gave a quiet laugh. "Mr. Whitaker does not handle routine staff theft. This is not routine." "No," Celeste said. "It is sad, especially for a mother." The word mother hit harder than the accusation. Micah hugged his lunchbox tighter. It was yellow with a faded cartoon sun on it, bought from a church basement sale for $2. Inside was half a peanut butter sandwich, sliced apples, and a napkin where Laila had drawn a tiny heart because Micah could not read yet. He knew the heart meant Mama. Now he was watching strangers make Sama small. Graham held out a plastic tray. Phone, keys, badge. Laila reached for the silver badge pinned to her uniform. Laila Monroe, housekeeping staff. It was scratched at one corner from the day Micah played with it on the bus. It was not much to anyone in that room. But to Laila, it meant rent paid, food bought, lights kept on, And one more month of not falling apart. Her fingers paused. Celeste noticed. That doesn't belong to you anymore. Laila unpinned it. The tiny metal clasp pulled one thread loose from her uniform. Micah heard it. Mama? I'm okay, she said. She was not. Celeste stepped closer and reached toward Layla's apron. Please don't touch me, Layla said. I'm checking the pocket. I said don't touch me. The room tightened. Graham moved forward. Layla lifted both hands, slowly, showing empty palms. She knew how quickly fear could be turned into attitude, and pain could be renamed aggression. Celeste slipped 2 fingers into the apron pocket and pulled out a folded tissue, a bus pass, and a small blue card. For half a second, Celeste's polished face changed. Layla saw it. Graham frowned. What's that? Nothing. Celeste said too quickly. The blue card slid from the tissue and dropped to the floor near the wheel of the serving cart. Micah looked down. Layla stopped breathing. Printed on that card was a private emergency number almost no one in the house was supposed to use. Elias Whitaker had pressed it into Laila's hand 2 weeks earlier, her thin fingers trembling. If they ever push you out, child, do not leave without this. Celeste turned back to Laila, not noticing the child bending behind the cart. You will leave through the rear gate, she said. You will not contact Mrs. Whitaker. You will not speak to vendors, staff, or anyone connected to this household. I didn't steal from anyone. Celeste leaned in. Think carefully about what kind of future you want for your son. Even the room seemed ashamed then. Layla looked at Micah. He was standing again, quiet and small, one hand hidden inside the pocket of his overalls. The blue card was gone. Graham pointed toward the back hallway. Let's go. Layla reached for her son's hand, but Micah was not looking at her. He was looking at the old pantry phone mounted beside the swinging door, the one no one used anymore. And for the first time that morning, Laila felt something colder than fear. She felt the truth beginning to move without her. 3 months earlier, Laila Monroe first saw the Whitaker mansion through a curtain of cold March rain. The house sat behind iron gates on 22 acres outside Greenwich, Connecticut, with white columns, dark windows, and a driveway so long the city bus could have turned around twice before reaching the front. But Laila did not enter through the front. People like her were directed past the hedges, down the service road, and into a side entrance near the laundry vents. She arrived at 6:12 in the morning with damp cuffs, tired eyes, and a folder of documents held under her coat. Micah was still asleep at her neighbor's apartment when she left. She had kissed his forehead in the dark and whispered, "Mama got this," though she was not always sure she did. Rent was due in 11 days. Her old job at the hotel had cut hours without warning. Daycare cost more than she wanted to admit, and the shoes she wore to the interview had a thin split near the sole that let the rain in one careful drop at a time. Still, when Celeste Dretton looked Layla up and down in the staff corridor, Layla stood straight. "You understand discretion is everything here," Celeste said. "Mom, no gossip, no photos, no wandering, no personal calls, no emotional displays in front of guests." Layla nodded. Celeste glanced at the folder in Layla's hand. "You have housekeeping experience?" 7 years. Hotel suites, private residences, hospice rooms. The last one made Celeste pause. "Hospice, my grandmother," Laila said, then paid work after that. Celeste's face did not soften, but her pen moved. "The East Wing is restricted unless assigned. Mr. Whitaker's study is not to be entered without written approval. Mrs. Whitaker's sitting room requires patience. She asks questions twice. Sometimes 3 times. Layla heard the warning beneath the words. Old woman, difficult woman, smile and endure. But Layla only said, "I don't mind repeating myself." That was the first thing Beatrice Whitaker liked about her. By the end of the first week, Layla knew the rhythms of the mansion. The laundry machines roared before sunrise. the pastry chef hummed when nervous. Graham Lyle checked doors at 7 Clacka, 11-4, but skipped the east hallway whenever Celeste was already there. Denester Caldwell, the junior cook, saved burnt biscuits for the gardeners and cried quietly in the walk-in freezer when payroll was late. And Elias Whitaker was mostly a voice on screens. He appeared in business broadcasts, investor calls, and framed magazine covers near the lower library. In person, Laila saw him only twice in the first month. Once walking fast with a phone at his ear, once standing outside his mother's room, not entering, his hand resting on the doorframe like guilt had stopped him there. The mansion had many beautiful rooms, but very few warm ones. The swarmest place was the small staff sitting room beside the pantry, where an old beige phone still hung on the wall. Above it was a blue emergency card taped under clear plastic. Private Whitaker Family Emergency Line. Laila noticed the card on her third day. Micah noticed it on his first. Daycare closed that morning because of a burst pipe, and Laila had been allowed to bring him for 2 hours until her neighbor could pick him up. He sat in the corner with his yellow lunchbox and traced the printed numbers with one finger. 1, he whispered. 8. 8. Don't touch that. Celeste snapped from the doorway. Micah pulled his hand back so fast his lunchbox tipped over. Laila crossed the room and lifted it. He was just looking. That number is not for staff use, Celeste said. Her eyes moved from Laila to the child. And certainly not for children. Laila lowered her voice. I understand. But Beatrice Whitaker, who had been passing by slowly with her nurse, stopped near the doorway. What did the child do? Nothing that concerns you, Mrs. Whitaker, Celeste said. Beatrice looked at Laila instead. What is his name? Micah. The old woman's expression changed as if the name had opened a window somewhere in her memory. Micah, she repeated. A prophet's name. Micah peeked from behind Laila's skirt. Beatrice smiled faintly. Little prophets notice what kings ignore. Celeste's jaw tightened. That was the first time Laila understood that Beatrice was not confused. She was being dismissed. After that, Beatrice began asking for Laila by name. Not every day, but often enough for Celeste to dislike it. Laila folded blankets in the lavender sitting room while Beatrice watched the rain slide down the tall windows. She brushed crumbs from the old woman's cardigan. She listened when Beatrice spoke of Elias as a lonely boy who used to count delivery trucks from this upstairs balcony. He built a company out of movement, Beatrice said once, but now he never stays still long enough to see what is standing right in front of him. Laila thought about that for the rest of the day, because she had noticed things too. Invoices left open on Celeste's desk, with numbers scratched out. Jewelry inventory forms signed before items were counted. Graham quietly turning off a hallway sensor near the east study. Denise carrying sealed envelopes to vendors who never entered through the proper gate. Small things. But small things had weight when they kept repeating. One rainy Thursday in April, Laila was polishing the table outside the east study when she heard Celeste's voice by the door. If she keeps spending time with Mrs. Whitaker, move her back to laundry. Graham answered, the maid? Laila, Celeste said. She watches too much. Laila froze with the cloth in her hand. Inside the study, a drawer closed hard. Then Celeste said something Laila would remember for weeks. People like her survive by pretending not to see. Remind her of that. Laila stepped away before the door opened. That evening, when she went to collect Beatrice's tea tray, the old woman was waiting with a folded blue card in her palm. It was the same number from the staff sitting room. Beatrice's hand trembled as she pressed it into Laila's apron pocket. If they ever push you out, she whispered, do not leave without this. Laila looked toward the hallway. Mrs. Whitaker, I don't want trouble. Beatrice's eyes sharpened. Trouble is already here, child. The question is whether anyone honest will still be standing when it shows itself. Laila wanted to hand the card back. Instead, she kept it. If you have ever watched someone be judged before anyone knew their story, stay with Laila a little longer. And in the comments, tell me who taught you not to look away. Because by the time the house finally turned on her, that little blue card would be the only thing the powerful forgot to fear. After Beatrice gave Laila the blue card, the mansion no longer felt like a house full of secrets. It felt like a house waiting for one secret to break. Laila carried the card in the inner pocket of her apron, folded behind her bus pass, where no one would notice it unless they were looking too closely. Every morning before she left her apartment, she checked for 3 things: her keys, Micah's lunch, and that card. She did not know why she kept it. Maybe because Beatrice had looked at her like a person, not a uniform. Maybe because Laila had spent too much of her life learning that warnings from older women should never be ignored. By May, Beatrice had begun refusing tea unless Laila brought it. Celeste hated that. She called it attachment, as if kindness were a disease that needed to be managed. "She is not your grandmother," Celeste said one afternoon while Laila folded towels in the laundry room. "No, Mom, and you are not paid to entertain her. I only answer when she speaks to me." Celeste stepped closer, her perfume too sharp for the damp heat of the laundry. "Then answer less." Laila kept folding. That was one thing poverty had taught her. Sometimes you survive by giving people no handle to grab. Still, she noticed more. She noticed Beatrice's medication chart had 2 different sets of initials on days when only one nurse had been present. She noticed a pearl bracelet listed as sent for repair, though Beatrice had worn it at breakfast the same morning. She noticed invoices for imported flowers arriving every Friday, even on weeks, when the vases held grocery store lilies with brown edges. And she noticed the East study. No one entered that room casually. Celeste had the key. Graham had the security code. Elias, when he was home, sometimes stood in there alone at night with the lights off, looking out over the dark lawn like a man trying to see his old life from a distance. One evening, Laila was collecting towels from the hallway outside the study when she saw Oren Price kneeling near the baseboard with a small flashlight. Oren had worked at the estate for 26 years. He spoke little, fixed everything, and watched more than people knew. "Loose wire?" Laila asked. Oren did not look up. "Loose story." Laila paused. He shut the panel and rose slowly, his knees cracking. "You ever notice," he said, "how rich houses always got more locks than poor ones, but somehow more things go missing?" Laila glanced toward the corner camera. Oren followed her eyes. "That one's been blinking wrong since February." "Does Mr. Whitaker know?" Oren gave a tired smile. "Mr. Whitaker knows what people put in reports." Before Laila could ask more, Graham's voice came from the far end of the hall. "You assigned here?" Oren picked up his toolbox. "Water pressure complaint." Graham looked at Laila. "And you?" "Towels." His eyes stayed on her apron a second too long. "Then move." Laila moved, but Oren's words stayed with her. That night, Beatrice was sitting by the window with a blanket over her knees. Rain tapped against the glass. The room smelled faintly of lavender soap and old paper. "You saw Oren today," Beatrice said. Laila looked up. "Yes, he keeps records." "What kind of records?" "The kind honest men keep when dishonest people own the official ones." Beatrice reached for her tea, but her hand trembled. Laila steadied the cup without making a fuss of it. The old woman's eyes filled, though her voice remained firm. "My son thinks money protects people. He does not understand it also attracts people who learn the shape of his absence." Laila did not answer. She had learned that some truths needed room to breathe. Beatrice turned toward her. "They have been taking from this house for years. Not all at once. Small enough to explain. Large enough to matter. Why not tell Mr. Whitaker?" I tried. Beatrice's mouth tightened. They made it sound like grief, then age, then confusion. Laila felt something heavy settle in her chest. Because that was another kind of theft, not diamonds, not money. Credibility, the stealing of a person's right to be believed. Beatrice reached into the cushion beside her and pulled out a small cream envelope. Her fingers hesitated before giving it to Laila. "Do not open this unless they accuse you." Laila stepped back. "Mrs. Whitaker, I can't take that." "You can. I need this job. That is exactly why they will choose you." The words were not cruel. They were tired. Laila took the envelope. Inside, through the thin paper, she could feel something flat and hard. Maybe a key card. Maybe a photograph. Maybe proof. At the doorway, a floorboard whispered. Laila turned. No one was there. But farther down the hall, Oren Price stood half hidden in shadow, one hand resting on his black maintenance notebook. For a moment, his eyes met Laila's. He had seen the envelope. He had heard enough, and still he said nothing. Laila slipped the envelope into her apron beside the blue card, not knowing that soon Celeste would stop setting warnings in her path and start setting traps. The first trap came on a Tuesday morning, small enough to be called a mistake. Laila arrived at 5:58, tied her apron, and found her name moved from the west guest rooms to basement laundry. No warning, no explanation, just a printed schedule clipped to the wall with Celeste Drayton's initials at the bottom. Denise Caldwell saw Laila reading it. "They moved you," she whispered. Laila nodded. Denise looked toward the hallway before speaking again. "Just keep your head down today." That was the kind of advice people gave when they knew more than they were brave enough to say. In the laundry room, heat rolled from the dishwasher in thick waves. Sheets from 12 think rooms waited in tall canvas bins. Laila worked without complaint, but every hour brought a new interruption. A missing silver spoon from the breakfast tray, a guest towel folded wrong, a complaint that Mrs. Whitaker's sitting room had not been dusted, though Laila had not been assigned there. By noon, Celeste appeared in the doorway holding a clipboard. "You seem distracted lately." "I'm doing the work I was assigned." "Are you?" Laila met her eyes. Celeste smiled without warmth. "Careful, Laila. People in difficult situations sometimes start believing they are being watched because they feel guilty." Laila said nothing, but she understood. Celeste was not just testing her. She was building a record. Over the next 2 weeks, the traps became sharper. Graham asked to inspect Laila's locker twice. A guest claimed a cashmere scarf went missing, then found it in her own suitcase. A vase broke in the east hallway during Laila's day off, but Celeste still asked where Laila had been at 3:20. Each accusation came dressed as a question. Each question carried a warning. Then came the donor dinner. It was held on the last Thursday in May, a humid evening when thunder sat low over Gressmich and the mansion glowed like a museum full of secrets. Elias Whitaker was still away. Beatrice had been told to rest upstairs. 40 guests filled the dining room below, laughing over crystal glasses while the staff moved like shadows around them. Laila had been assigned to linens. She pressed napkins, counted tablecloths, and kept her eyes on her work. The cream envelope from Beatrice was still hidden at home now, tucked behind a loose tile under Laila's bathroom sink. Only the blue emergency card remained in her apron. At 8:17, Denise rushed into the linen room, pale and breathless. "Celeste wants the ivory runners brought to the side hall." "They're already there." "No," she said now. Laila looked at her carefully. Denise would not meet her eyes. In the side hall, the linen cart waited alone beneath the portrait lights. No staff, no guests, just the low rumble of thunder and the distant clink of silverware. Laila reached for the top runner. Something hard slipped from the fold and struck the floor. A diamond cufflink. For a moment, she only stared at it. The tiny stones caught the light, bright and cold. Then she heard voices near the pantry door. Celeste. Graham, she'll touch it, Graham murmured. She already has access to the cart, Celeste said. That is enough. Laila's hand froze inches above the cufflink. So that was the plan, not a mistake, not suspicion. A frame. Her pulse beat in her throat as she picked up the cufflink with the edge of a clean napkin, never touching it with bare skin. She slipped it into an empty sugar packet box on the lower shelf of the cart and pushed the cart back exactly where it had been. Then she walked away, not fast. Fast looked guilty. That night, after the guests left, Celeste came to the laundry room. Did you handle the ivory runners? Yes. Anything unusual? Laila folded a napkin. No, Mom. Celeste studied her. For the first time, uncertainty moved across her face. Laila had not followed the script. At 10:42, when Laila finally clocked out, Oren Price was waiting near the service exit with a wrench in his hand and his black maintenance notebook tucked under one arm. You need to be careful, he said. I am careful. No, Oren said quietly. You are honest. That is different. Laila looked toward the security camera above the door. Oren lowered his voice. They are going to come harder now. Then say what you know. His face tightened. The silence between them felt old. Older than the mansion. Older than both of them. I got a daughter in nursing school, he said, and I have a son. He looked away. Laila regretted the sharpness as soon as she said it, but she did not take it back, because fear was understandable. But it was not harmless. The next morning, when Laila arrived, her locker was already open. Her purse had been searched. Her spare shoes were on the floor, and pinned to the inside of the metal door was a note written in Celeste's clean, narrow handwriting. Last chance, Laila removed the note and folded it once. Then she placed it beside the blue emergency card in her apron. By then, she understood something clearly. Celeste did not only want her gone, Celeste wanted her gone guilty. And before the week ended, the whole house would be called to watch. The firing happened 2 mornings later, not in an office, not privately, not with a witness who could speak freely. Celeste chose the staff entrance because humiliation worked better where everyone could see it. Laila knew something was wrong the moment she stepped inside with Micah beside her. His daycare had flooded again after overnight rain, and the neighbor who usually helped was at a clinic appointment. Laila had called ahead. The nurse had said Micah could sit in the staff room until noon. But Celeste was waiting near the service desk. Graham stood behind her. Denise Bessis was by the pantry door, holding a tray she had no reason to hold. Oren Price was near the maintenance closet, his black notebook tucked under his arm. Nobody looked surprised. That was how Laila knew the morning had been arranged before she arrived. Laila Monroe, Celeste said, place your bag on the desk. Micah looked up at his mother. Mama, it's okay, Laila said, though nothing in that room was okay. Celeste opened the leather folder in her hand. After several warnings, you continued to violate estate policy. Restricted movement, unauthorized presence of a child, and now theft of personal property. Laila felt the words strike one by one. Theft? Graham placed the diamond cufflink on the desk. The same cufflink Laila had found in the linen cart. The one she had moved without touching. The one that should have still been hidden inside the sugar packet box, unless someone had gone back for it. Celeste's voice stayed smooth. It was recovered from an area assigned to you. That is not true.
Your denial is noted.
Laila looked at Denise. Ice's eyes filled, but she looked away. Then Laila looked at Oren. His jaw tightened. His hand moved slightly on the notebook. But he said nothing. That silence hurt more than Graham's stare, because Laila had not expected courage from Celeste. She had not expected mercy from Graham. But from the people who knew what it meant to be small in a house like this, she had hoped for one voice, just one. Celeste turned toward the staff gathered along the corridor. Let this be a reminder. Trust is earned here. And when trust is broken, there are consequences. Laila felt Micah move behind her. He stepped closer to the serving cart, half hidden by its silver shelves. She wanted to pick him up and carry him out before the room could leave any more marks on his memory. But Graham blocked the hallway with his body. "Badge," he said. Laila unpinned it slowly. Laila Monroe, housekeeping staff, a scratched little badge, a small thing. But it had carried her through 3 months of early buses, sore feet, quiet insults, and the hope that steady work could become steady ground. She placed it in the tray. Celeste reached toward her apron. "Now empty your pockets." "Do not touch me," Laila said. Graham stepped forward. Laila lifted her hands. That was when Celeste pulled out the folded tissue, the bus pass, the warning note from the locker, and the blue emergency card. For half a breath, Celeste froze. Then the card slipped. It fell near the serving cart. Micah saw it. Laila saw him see it. Her heart knocked once, hard. Celeste was too busy recovering her smile. "You will leave through the rear gate," she said. "You will not contact Mrs. Whitaker. You will not contact Mr. Whitaker. You will not return to this property. I want this documented," Laila said. "It is documented." "No," Laila said. "I mean honestly." The room stirred. Celeste leaned closer, her voice dropping low enough that only the nearest people could hear. "Think carefully about what kind of future you want for your son." Laila did not move, but something inside her went very still. There are threats people make when they want your money. There are threats people make when they want your silence. And then there are threats that show you exactly who they are. Micah bent behind the cart. His little hand closed around the blue card. No one stopped him. Graham pointed toward the rear hallway. "Move." Laila reached for Micah, but in that instant, Denise dropped the tray she had been holding. Metal struck stone. Cups rolled in every direction. Several staff members flinched. It lasted only seconds. But seconds are sometimes enough for a child. Micah slipped behind the pantry door. Laila turned. "Micah?" Celeste snapped, "Find him." Graham cursed under his breath and moved toward the pantry, but Micah was already inside the small staff sitting room, standing on the lower shelf beneath the old beige phone. His hands were clumsy. His breath shook. The blue card was pressed against the wall as he tried to match the numbers. He had traced them before. 1, 8. 8. His finger trembled over each button. In the corridor, La's voice sharpened with fear. "Micah, baby, answer me," the old phone clicked. Somewhere far away, inside a glass conference room 3 states over, Elias Whitaker looked down at a private line that almost never rang. He almost ignored it, then he answered. For 2 seconds, he heard nothing but a child breathing. Then Micah whispered, "Mr. Mama crying." And behind that tiny voice, Elias heard Celeste straighten say, clear as glass, "Get that boy before he ruins everything." Elias Whitaker did not answer the emergency line because he expected trouble. He answered because his late wife had been the one who insisted the numbers exist. The phone vibrated on the glass conference table while 12 executives stared at a market expansion chart. Outside the retreat center in Vermont, rain moved across the windows in silver sheets. Inside, everything smelled like coffee, leather chairs, and men pretending that numbers could explain the world. Elias looked at the screen. Private family emergency. No one used that line unless something had gone terribly wrong. He stepped away from the table and answered in the hallway. "This is Elias." At first, there was only breathing, small breathing, uneven, frightened. Close to the receiver, Elias frowned. "Hello then," a child whispered. "Mr. Mama crying." Elias went still. Behind the child's voice came a sharp sound, a tray scraping, shoes moving quickly. Then Celeste Drayton's voice cut through the line. "Get that boy before he ruins everything." The words did not make sense at first, not because Elias failed to hear them, because for one foolish second, his mind refused to place them inside his own house. "Who is this?" he asked. The child sniffed. "Micah." Elias knew the name only vaguely. He had seen it once on a temporary staff exception form, a housekeeper's child, flooded daycare, approved by nursing staff, Micah. Elias said carefully, lowering his voice, "Where are you?" "Phone room."
The staff sitting room?
A small breath. "Yes." In the background, Graham Lyle barked, "Open that door." Then Laila's voice came through, strained with terror. "Do not scare him. He is 3 years old." Elias stepped away from the conference room door. Something cold moved through him. "Micah, listen to me," he said. "Put the phone down, but don't hang up. Can you do that?" There was a soft plastic bump as the receiver hit something hard. The line remained open. Now, Elias could hear the room more clearly. Celeste's voice was lower, controlled but shaking beneath the polish. "You had no right to call that number," Laila answered. "I didn't call anyone. Do not play innocent with me. My son is scared because you surrounded us like criminals," Graham said. "Enough. Take the child and go." Then another voice, quieter, denies. "She didn't steal it." Silence followed. Elias closed his eyes. He had spent years believing silence meant order. In his house, staff moved quietly, doors closed quietly, mistakes disappeared quietly. He had thought that was professionalism. Now, through one old phone on a service wall, he heard what quiet had really been protecting. Celeste spoke first. "Denise, go back to the kitchen." "No," Denise said, her voice trembling. "I saw you put the cufflink in the cart." A sound came next that Elias would remember for the rest of his life. Not a scream, not a gasp, a small broken breath from Laila Monroe. The sound of a woman realizing she had not imagined her own persecution. Elias gripped the phone harder. "Victor," he called toward the conference room. His attorney, Victor Hahn, stepped into the hallway within seconds. "What happened?" Elias held up one hand and kept listening. Graham's voice lowered. "Denise, you need to think before you talk." "I have thought," Denise said. "I thought all night, and I'm tired." Celeste snapped, "You are emotional." "No," Denise said, "I'm ashamed." Elias looked at Victor. "Record this." Victor's expression changed. "The emergency line records automatically." "What?" "Your wife requested it after the Lake House medical incident. Every call is archived with timestamp and location." For a moment, Elias could not speak. His wife had built a safeguard into his home because she had understood something he had forgotten. Power needed witnesses. On the line, Laila said, "Where is my son?" Micah whispered from somewhere close to the phone, "Mama." Elias leaned toward the receiver. "Laila Monroe, this is Elias Whitaker." The room on the other end seemed to freeze. No one spoke. Then Laila said, "Mr. Whitaker?" Her voice carried disbelief, fear, and something almost worse than both, hope that did not trust itself yet. "I am on the emergency line," Elias said. "No one leaves that house. No one touches Mrs. Monroe or her child. No one touches any records, cameras, lockers, staff schedules, invoices, or security logs." Celeste recovered first. "Mr. Whitaker, this is a misunderstanding. We were handling an internal matter. I heard enough to know you were not handling it honestly. Sir, with respect, a staff member has manipulated your private line through her child." Laila whispered, "No." Elias's face tightened. "Celeste, stop speaking." Those 3 words carried more force than shouting. Victor was already typing into his phone. "I'm contacting the external security vendor," he said quietly, "and local counsel." Elias nodded. "Lock remote access. Preserve all footage." From the phone, Graham said, "Sir, should I secure—" "You will step away from them," Elias said. "And you will surrender your security tablet to Oren Price." Another silence. Then Oren's low voice entered the call. "I'm here, Mr. Whitaker." Elias had known Oren for years and somehow not known him at all. He knew the man fixed pipes, calibrated alarms, handled storm damage, and sent plain reports with no wasted words. He did not know what Oren had seen. He did not know what Oren had swallowed. Oren, Elias said, "Can I trust you to keep that room intact until I arrive?" The answer did not come quickly. When it did, it sounded like a man stepping across a line he had avoided for too long. "Yes, sir, but you need more than that room." Elias looked toward the rain-streaked window. "What do you mean? I mean, this has been going on for years." Celeste's voice sharpened. "Oren," he ignored her. "I have records." A chair scraped on the other end. Someone began crying softly. Maybe Denise. Maybe someone else who had watched too much and spoken too little. Then, faint but clear, another voice appeared in the background. Fragile, elderly, furious. "Give me that phone." Elias's chest tightened. "Mother!" Beatrice Whitaker spoke slowly, each word steadier than her body had been in months. "Elias, I told you this house was eating honest people." He could not answer, because in that moment, with rain striking the glass, and his empire waiting behind a conference room door, Elias Whitaker finally understood that the emergency was not the missing cufflink. The emergency was what had been happening in his name. Elias Whitaker arrived at his own house, like a stranger entering a crime he had paid to decorate. The black SUV stopped at the rear entrance at 2:16 in the afternoon. Rain still clung to the stone steps. The service corridor smelled of wet coats, coffee, and fear. No one spoke when he walked in. Laila Monroe stood near the pantry door with Micah in her arms. Her uniform was wrinkled where Celeste had grabbed the apron. Her eyes were dry now, but not calm. There is a kind of pain that stops crying because it has moved too deep for tears. Micah rested his cheek against her shoulder, one small hand still holding the blue card. Elias saw it. Then he saw the badge in the plastic tray, Laila Monroe. Housekeeping staff, something in him sank. Celeste stepped forward first. "Mr. Whitaker, I can explain." Elias did not look at her. Not here within 20 minutes. The formal dining room had become the kind of room it had never been meant to be. No crystal glasses, no donors, no laughter under chandeliers. Just staff seated along one side, security tablets on the table, printed schedules, vendor invoices, access logs, and one diamond cufflink sealed in a clear evidence bag. Victor Hahn stood near the head of the table with his laptop open. Beatrice sat beside Elias, wrapped in her lavender cardigan, looking smaller than the room, but stronger than anyone expected. Laila stood at the far end with Micah beside her chair. She had refused to sit until everyone else did. That was not pride, that was caution. People who have been blamed learn not to relax too soon. Elias finally turned to Celeste. "Start." Celeste folded her hands. Mrs. Monroe violated multiple estate rules. Her child was present in a restricted area. A personal item belonging to you was recovered from linens under her control. My staff acted according to protocol. Victor looked at his screen. The emergency recording contradicts parts of that. Celeste's face tightened. Recordings can lack context. Denise let out a quiet sound, almost a laugh, almost a sob. Celeste turned sharply toward her. Elias raised one hand. "You will not intimidate anyone in this room." The words changed the air. Denise gripped the edge of her chair. "I saw her," she said. Her voice shook, but it stayed alive. "I saw Miss Drayton put the cufflink in the cart after dinner service. She had gloves on. She told me to keep my mouth shut unless I wanted my father's insurance paperwork to get delayed again." Celeste's eyes hardened. "That is a lie." "No," Denise said. "The lie was me staying quiet." Victor typed something. "Time? About 8:05, Denise said. "Maybe 8:10. Oren Price opened his black maintenance notebook. 8:07, he said. Everyone looked at him. Oren did not rush. He placed the notebook on the table like it weighed more than paper. "I was repairing the pantry vent. I heard the cartwheels. Wrote down the time because the east hallway sensor had been bypassed again." Graham shifted in his seat. Elias turned to him. Bypassed by whom? Graham's jaw worked once. I do not recall. Oren flipped a page. March 14, East Hall sensor disabled, 9:32 p.m., security override code GL. April 3, same code, April 19, same code. May 28, donor dinner, same code. Graham stared at the table. Celeste said, maintenance staff do not have authority to interpret security matters. Oren looked at her for the first time. No, Mom. But I know when a wire is cut, and I know when a story is too neat. The room held its breath. Elias took the notebook. The pages were filled with dates, times, invoice numbers, broken locks, missing inventory, altered repairs, and notes written in careful block letters. Not accusations, observations. The kind of truth a cautious man records when he is too afraid to speak it, yet too decent to forget it. Beatrice touched the edge of the notebook. I told you, she said softly. Elias could not look at his mother right away. Victor connected his laptop to the dining room screen. Footage appeared from the side hall outside the linen room, grainy, silent, time-stamped 8:06 p.m. Celeste entered with something small in her gloved hand, 8:07 p.m. She lifted the top runner and placed the object inside, 8:09 p.m. Denise appeared at the far end, saw Celeste, froze, then backed away. 8:17 Laila entered. She did not steal, she did not hide jewelry in her pocket. She found the cufflink, picked it up with a napkin, and moved it aside as if she already understood the danger closing around her. The room watched in silence. Laila held Micah's hand under the table. Lekius turned from the screen to Celeste. You framed her. Celeste's composure cracked, but only at the edges. I protected this household from instability. You plant accidents on an innocent woman. She was becoming inappropriate with your mother. She was crossing boundaries. Staff like that create confusion. Beatrice's voice cut through the room. Laila was the only one here who treated me like I still had a mind. Celeste looked at Elias. You have no idea how difficult this house became after your wife died. You disappeared. Your mother accused people. Staff panicked. I held everything together. Elias stood very still. For one moment, the room saw the truth inside the lie. Celeste had held something together, but not the house. Her control, Victor clicked to another file. Veteran records show inflated floral invoices, duplicate elder care billing, and private security charges routed through shell accounts. We are preserving everything for outside review. Graham pushed back from the table. I did what I was told. Oren closed his notebook. No, you did what paid. That simple sentence landed harder than shouting. Celeste looked around the room then, searching for the old arrangement, fearful staff, silent witnesses. A billionaire too busy to ask questions. A fragile elderly woman no one believed. A black maid easy to blame. But the arrangement was gone because a 3-year-old boy had picked up a blue card, because a frightened cook had spoken, because an old maintenance man had kept dates, because a mother had endured long enough for truth to find a way into the room. Elias picked up Laila's badge from the tray. He walked to her slowly. I am sorry, he said. Laila looked at the badge in his hand, but she did not reach for it. The room waited. And for the first time that day, Laila Monroe was the one Don with the power to decide what happened next. Laila looked at the badge in Elias Whitaker's hand. For 3 months, that little piece of metal had decided where she could stand, which doors she could open, and how softly she was expected to speak. Now the man who owned the house was holding it like an apology could fit inside a scratched silver edge. I cannot take that back like nothing happened, Laila said. Elias lowered his hand. No, he said, you cannot. The room stayed quiet. Celeste Drayton sat at the table with her face pale and stiff, as if she still believed posture could save her. Graham Lyle stared down at his hands. Denise wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her kitchen blouse. Oren Price kept his notebook closed now, both palms resting on top of it. Micah leaned against Laila's leg, tired from fear he was too young to name. Beatrice reached across the table. "Laila," she said gently, "you protected me when no one believed me." Laila's eyes moved to the old woman. That was the truth she had carried under every insult. She had not stayed so silent because she was weak. She had stayed because Beatrice had been trapped inside her own home, managed by people who called her confused whenever she came too close to the truth. "I heard them talking about you," Laila said. "About your medicine, about the bills."
About making your son think you were forgetting things.
Elias closed his eyes. The words hurt him, but Laila did not soften them. Some pain had to be allowed to arrive fully before healing could begin. "I wanted proof before I spoke," she continued. "Because women like me do not get believed just because we say something happened." Beatrice's hand trembled against the table. "I believed you." Laila swallowed. "I know." Victor Hahn gathered the records into neat stacks, but even he looked different now. Less like a man containing a scandal, more like a man standing inside a lesson he had not expected to learn. "External investigators are on the way," he said. "The security vendors has locked all footage. Payroll and vendor accounts will be audited. No one involved will remain employed during review." Elias looked at Celeste. "You are terminated effective immediately." Celeste's mouth opened. He did not let her speak. "And you will leave this property with outside security, not estate security. There will be no quiet resignation, no reference letter, no hidden agreement." For the first time, Celeste looked afraid, not of losing a job. Of being seen, Graham was dismissed next. Then 2 administrative staff connected to the false invoices. Their names were recorded. Their access cards were disabled. The house that had once protected secrets now began closing doors against the people who had used them, but Laila felt no joy watching it, only exhaustion. Justice did not erase the morning. It did not remove the memory of Micah hiding behind a cart. It did not put tenderness back into the voices that had threatened her. It simply told the truth where lies had been standing. Elias turned back to her. "Mrs. Monroe, I owe you wages, damages, a public correction to your employment record, and more than an apology. Victor will make sure every legal option is explained to you by counsel who does not work for me." Laila studied him. "And your mother?" Elias looked at Beatrice. His face changed then. Not billionaire, not employer, just son. "My mother comes first," he said. "From now on, no one speaks for her while she is in the room." Beatrice smiled faintly. "Good. I was getting tired of being treated like furniture." A small laugh broke through the room, not loud, but human. Micah tugged Laila's skirt. "Mama, we go home?" Laila bent and touched his cheek. "Yes, baby, soon." He held up the blue card. "I called." Everyone looked at him. Micah suddenly grew shy and pressed the card against his chest. Laila knelt in front of him. "You were very brave," she whispered. His lip trembled. "You was crying. I know. I don't like when Mama crying." Laila pulled him close. For a moment, the mansion disappeared. No chandeliers, no records, no billionaires. Just a mother holding the child who had heard her pain and believed it mattered. 2 weeks later, Laila did not return as housekeeping staff. She returned by choice, not through the service entrance, through the front door. Elias had offered her a settlement. She accepted enough to breathe again, enough to move into a safer apartment, enough to choose her next step without panic making the decision for her. But when Beatrice asked Laila would consider becoming her personal care coordinator, Laila took 3 days before answering. She said yes, only after the role was written clearly, paid fairly, and protected from household politics. Her new badge was not silver-edged. It was simple, white, and direct. Laila Monroe, care coordinator. On her first morning, she brought Micah with her only long enough for Beatrice to give him a small plate of butter cookies and thank him properly. You called my son when the grown-ups forgot how to be brave, Beatrice said. Micah looked at the cookie. Phone was tall. Beatrice laughed until her eyes watered. In the renovated staff sitting room, the old beige phone remained on the wall. But beside it, Elias had placed the original blue emergency card inside a small frame. Below it, he added no grand speech. Only 4 words, small voices matter here. Laila stood in front of it for a long time. Oren joined her quietly. I should have spoken sooner, he said. Laila did not rush to comfort him. No one gets to undo silence by naming it late, she said. He nodded, accepting the truth. Then she added, but you did speak. Oren's eyes softened. Not before your boy did. Laila looked toward the garden where Micah was showing Beatrice how his lunchbox zipper worked if you pulled it gently to the left. No, she said. Not before him. And maybe that was the lesson that's needed, Miss Most. Truth does not always enter through the largest door. Sometimes it comes through a service hallway in the pocket of a frightened child on a blue card adults thought they could ignore. Sometimes justice begins with a voice so small the powerful almost hang up on it. But they should not, because the quietest person in the room may be the one who remembers the number. If this story reminded you of someone who was underestimated, someone who stayed gentle even when the world treated them unfairly, leave their name in the comments. And if you believe stories like Laila's deserve to be heard, stay close to Hush Stories, where silence, dignity, and hidden truth always find their way into the light.